Okay, so we all know why artists should use data-driven technologies, why they should learn programming. But what about humanists? This is a very peculiar and maybe a bit weird group of people who say they cannot multiply 7 by 7 because they are humanists. Or, for example, they read Dostoevsky, so they cannot lower themselves to read properly an IKEA manual. Or, for example, if you ask them about their password for their banking account, they would say it's 1, 2, 3, 4 kitty or something like that. And I guess I can take the piece of the humanists because I'm one of them, and what's more, I'm 35, so I don't count as a millennial, and I'm afraid this is for real. And but I've realized that it does not go the other way around very often. So I know a lot of people from technical schools, a lot of scientists who actually read a lot of novels. They play instruments, and they're interested in culture, and they can even write an email or at least a text message. So when I graduated from culture studies, I decided to do one thing for my colleagues and friends. I decided to sorry, I'm not sure if it works. Okay. So I decided to establish a media lab, a place where people could play with technologies, and where they could learn a lot. They could learn programming, meet other people, do something valuable for them and for their cities. And I did it not just for nerds. I did it for sorry, there's still some problem with. Okay. Sorry, it's really slow. Okay, so I've done this not just for nerds and Mr. Robots. I've done this for also for real people like these that you can see on these pictures. And at some point, oh, sorry, I just have a problem. I cannot switch these slides. Okay, so. Okay, so but at some point we became interested in also doing the research with the methods that we've learned in the lab, and so we gradually got interested in exploring cities using data-driven methods. We even wrote a book about it, and one of the most successful projects we've done in Katowice, in my city, was the story of the city presented as data visualization, so that people coming to Katowice from, like, let's say, US or other countries in the world can learn the basics of history of our city within just 15 minutes. So they can get familiar with some processes. In order to do this, we've come up with a unique visual language, and we've created everything with just visualizations. But in fact, we were not interested in history of the city that much, but in what's going on right now and in that future. And yesterday, when I arrived, I grabbed a beer in a pub, and I started reading to this very sleek and nicely designed hipster guide that you produced here. And I learned that Košice used to be a steel city that has transformed within the last 10 years into something new. And this is actually the story of my city. Maybe we are still a coal city, but we have changed thoroughly throughout the last couple of years. And you may like this guy or not, the former mayor of the city and the former miner, but he decided to transfer a lot of money into cultural infrastructure in our city that was coming from the European Union at the time. So we've built like a new infrastructure in the place of the former coal mine. We created a museum and other great buildings, and it's changed the city, as well as the new events that arrived with this architecture and the money. So, and we were interested in learning about this transformation, and we wanted to pin it down to numbers. So we've collected the data from several sources, like the major effort was collecting almost 4,000 surveys from other people, for different people attending cultural events. We were particularly interested in the geography of culture and the spatial analysis. And we've realized interesting thing. We asked the museum, the newly established museum, to collect the data about people coming there in zip codes rather than just the city names or the places names where they were coming from. And we learned that that it's more likely for people living in the city center to go to the events, like rather than traveling from the southern part of the city, which is strange because most of the wealthy people are moving here right now because of this urban sprawl. So, and we ran this data against our research, our surveys, and we discovered that it's actually overlapping. So we found an interesting pattern, and what else? We realized that people from our city, like the white bar, tend to use car more often than people coming from other cities, which was quite a surprising thing, and made us thinking about the limited access to the venues because of the transit system. So what we decided to do, we pointed out, like we selected several cultural locations in the city center, and we created these isochrones, like the time travel distances from like each address point in the city to a particular location. In order to do this, we used Google API. So we've made like several thousands requests to measure the most likely travel time to a particular event. But then we realized that we started thinking what it means to travel, like let's say 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Because if you live in a small city, 45 minutes is a lot. But if you live in New York, it's quite a regular travel pattern. Okay. Sorry, it's not me. Can we move on? Well, it's a pity. Okay. In order to really know what it means, like to travel conveniently, we referred back to the survey that we've done, because around 600 people told us that they traveled on a particular date from a particular address, location, to a particular event. So we knew exactly that they traveled, for example, for 30 minutes to the event. So by a simple distribution, we knew that the standard travel time to the event on Thursday evening, because this is when the most events in our city are happening, which we learned from another research, we knew that the standard time is between 18 and 37 minutes. So we used these figures to actually create these isochrones and learn about, of course, these particular areas from which you need to, this is by the way for the car, from which you need to spend more than an hour on a bus to get to the city center. So within that time, in order to get to the lab, you would, on Thursday evening, you would have to travel an hour and 5 minutes. Within the same time, you could get to the lab from Tarnowskie Góry, which is in the north of the metropolitan area, a lovely city I'm coming from, or from Rybnik, which is on the western side of this metropolitan area, or even from another city, Oświęcim, which is in the other voivodeship. And I've mentioned this cultural zone. We've had a debate in our city among the activists whether it's detached from the city center or not functionally. So why people are not going to the museum, or maybe from some parts of the city. So we were interested in this case. And we learned from this analysis that there might be a problem, because if you look at these difficult times, these are locations in the city center. These cultural zone really stands out. So a lot of people in our city might have problem accessing it. And it's, what is interesting in this case is how you can combine the data from traditional survey with data analysis based on data coming from web. So this is Karin van Es. She gave a talk in Katowice last year, and we did an interview for our blog with her. And she said that data-driven approaches are often particularly good at raising new questions, which may need to be answered with different methods. So what it means is that we now try to convince our authorities in the city, and we are very likely to do this, to have to fund another research to learn the motivations of these people, why they are not coming. Maybe they go to another city, or maybe they use Netflix, or we just want to know if it's because of the public transit system, or maybe they need like a cultural center in their area. So this is how we try to combine these different methods of doing research. And if you're interested in this, you can look up this book published by Princeton. It's about how social scientists use big data sets to improve and extend their research methods. Okay. But if you're a humanist or a social scientist, and if you say anything about using data coming from, let's say, social media, someone will say, okay, but this data, it's not representative. Okay? But still, people learn about cultural events online. No one uses or posters, radio, leaflets, and that kind of stuff anymore, as it seems from our research. 80% of the people are online, are on social media. 80% of the people going to the events. So, for example, how you could use this data without it being representative is, like in this case, this is what you see is a correlation matrix. And it's created based it's created on data from Facebook, and it's a cluster of institutions in Katowice that share audience or people interested in these institutions on Facebook. So they asked us that they would like to learn how to or where to go to promote their events. So we are able to create, like based on certain conditions, parameters, we are able to find the most similar events they could reach out to in order to spread the word about their events. And it doesn't need to be representative as long as it works for some particular reasons. If they can get some other audience, we're fine with this. So this is how you could use these methods and this data to do something nice for your cultural institutions in the city. And but the most challenging thing, because the greatest challenge if you are a cultural researcher and at least in Central Europe, is the lack of data or data inconsistencies, because no one cares about it usually. And so why not use online resources? Let's say we have a couple of problems that we need to solve, a couple of interesting things that we would like to discuss. In 2015, we became a city of music, UNESCO City of Music, like you are the city of new media. And many people are interested in whether the music, the number of music events has changed throughout that time. And no one can answer it, basically. Has the cultural zone, the place you've seen, destroyed cultural life in other parts of the city? Because if you invest so much money in just one part of the town, people tend to go there because it's new and it does damage, or it does damage to other parts of the city and other pubs in different areas. And what's the economic impact of events in the city center if we don't know how many of them have been organized? And can we trust the official data sources collected by the, let's say, the city department of culture? As long as we want to stick with these traditional genres of culture, like music, theater, literature, cinema, visual arts. And these are usually events organized by public institutions. This is what is tracked, and this is what you can find data for in the public institutions. And what about DJ sets, video games, design fairs, city games or city walks like this one that we organized in our city in the lab? By means of these traditional categories, these events are definitely not culture. So in order to change it, we've decided to reach out to several other sources that would be more grassroots, that would cover different areas of cultural life in the city. So we've decided to grab the data from 5 magazines or media that inform about cultural events. So we've collected in total a database of 45,000 events in our city in the last years. And in some cases we had to pass this data directly from text files, like in case of, for example, this magazine. They shared like this kind of files with us, well structured, so we had to grab it from this files and put it into our database. In some cases, the administrators of those websites gave us the data directly, and in most cases we had to scrape it from the websites. And in one case, in case of Facebook, we used public API to extract the data, and you might be interested how we've done this. It was before the scandal with the Cambridge Analytica. So we just searched for Katowice-related fan pages. We filtered out irrelevant categories, because you can find those on Facebook. And we selected pages that are related to culture and added more pages by hand, just curating it a little bit. So we've ended up with more than 300 fan pages. We extracted all the events that were published by these websites, and we filtered out those that were not in Katowice, like more or less. It was quite difficult, as we realized. So what were the major challenges in creating this kind of database? First of all, it was duplicate events, because you can imagine that the same event is being promoted in in different media. So, for example, this event is the same one. This is the real case, like the name of the event. Or, for example, the name of the institution where we are based as a media lab, also the real case. This is our building. And what to do with this? We created a learning sample, and with 3 parameters, like the place name and start name, event name, and Facebook ID. And among those, we had to find the matching pairs, at least pairs. And we ended up with the learning sample of almost 13,000 events. We used a random forest algorithm to actually find the similarities between these names and these events. And here we see how it worked. Like, we were the most successful in the street names, place names. In the meantime, we also processed it a little bit with the Google API, which works very well in these cases, and also like the time difference between the events. And the name event was useful, but not as much. And the other challenge is that the data that comes from web is very shallow in most cases. So if you do the survey, you can ask several questions, you can go deeply, you can really interact with the person or collect a lot of money. And if you go online, you can just get as much as it is there. So usually It's not a lot of data, like time of the event, name, place, description. What you can do with this? It's very shallow. So what we did is they created our list of categories. We were interested in, for example, whether the event is a poetry meeting, performance, if it's outside or free of charge, and so on. And we took a sample of 2,000 events, and we set out to tag it manually. And if you know, it's a lot of work. But if you have a team of, let's say, almost 10 people, if you divided this huge set by 10, you have 200 events. And if you assume that every person will do just a couple of them daily, you end up with just 30 events. So it's relatively easy to do if you are a team. So we've done this, and again, we've created a learning sample, and based on these parameters, and we've ended up with the relatively clean data set of 40,000 events on which we can start the analysis. So you see that if you're interested in the details, you can find it on our GitHub page. So you see that what benefits it can bring to the researcher that in the real world would have to rely on traditional data sources. So based on this data set now we can find trends in cultural life of the city, like based on, let's say, common words, time patterns, or investigate the cultural geography of our city. So we've already published some of the results of these activities online in this report. It's called Data for Culture. And so you can find a lot of information, and you can read it even now on your mobile, because it's also important for us not to do the research, but also to communicate it to the people, like to those who are in charge, like who create public policies, but also cultural institutions and organizers who are our events. So you always need to think not just about how to do the research, but also how to promote it among the people and how to get them involved into the process. So we can find it all online. And the final thing that is crucial to me is why humanists, like social scientists, cultural researchers, why should they care about it? Why should they use this kind of methods? And it reminded me the famous Polish philosopher who died recently, Zygmunt Bauman, who has been very critical throughout his career. And when he was 80-something, I read an interview with him, and he was asked about the Amazon algorithms. And he said that he actually enjoys these algorithms because he can learn about new books. And so it was quite surprising to listen to something like this from someone who has been critical for so many years, who has criticized capitalism. And that made me think that the humanists, in order to stay relevant, they really need to learn about these algorithms, and then they really need to know how they work, and in best case, they should be able to program it from scratch, to learn the biases, to learn about wrong data, to learn about all these false pre-assumptions that are somehow built into these systems. So I believe this is the only way for the humanists to remain critical, truly critical, and maybe even relevant. Thank you.